The Edmonton Oilers picked up one of their most chaotic and exciting victories of the season Saturday night against the Blackhawks, pulling out a 4-3 come-from-behind victory. And on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to break down why, even though it's probably not how you draw it up, that's one of the Oilers' best wins of the entire season.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can enjoy the NFL playoffs with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $200 in bonus bets. Win or lose your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's show, the Oilers pulled one out of the hat on Saturday night. They found one of their best wins of the season, and why it's a good sign, even if it's not the most conventional path. So, in the course of a long season, each of these games starts to build towards something else. And it's tricky because when you're trying to discern what is and isn't important from an individual game in a long, challenging season, sometimes you're going to make mistakes. Sometimes you're going to have the wrong takeaway from a game, and you need to reconcile that miscalculation or that error in your evaluation as a part of finding where the path is going. And for a team like the Oilers, that has legitimate Stanley Cup aspirations and maybe the most wide open NHL season of the post-2013 lockout window, you're going to have nights where you just don't have it. You're going to have nights where you get off the bus and before you blink, you're going to be behind 2 goals. It happened Thursday night against the Penguins. We talked about it on Friday with Hunter Hodes of Locked On Penguins on our show. Friday, the Oilers were behind the 8 ball from the get-go. And when you're playing from behind almost the entire game, it's a real challenge to dig yourself back in against a team like Pittsburgh. And look, we know the Penguins defense is not very good. We know the Penguins have 2 bottom 10 goalies in terms of goals saved above expected this season, but you're not going to always be able to pull those games where you're trailing from behind out. It's coming from behind in the NHL is really challenging in any capacity. If you look at the splits for almost every single team in the NHL, when they score first, they have a significantly better record. This year, when the Oilers score first, they are 16-3-3. When the other team scores first, they are 10-10-0. There is a discernible difference in how you play the game when you score first versus when you score second. And the first big takeaway from Saturday night, and I know there are people who will say this, and typically I'm one of them. They'll say, well, you're playing the Blackhawks, you're expected to win the game. The fact that you let them get out to a 2-0 lead on you isn't a good look. You shouldn't be that excited that you won that game. And I can understand that mindset because there are points in a season where you expect your team to get off the bus and say, that's the worst team in the NHL. We go out there and we play even half of what we're capable of. We'll put this game away before the third period starts, and then we can all worry about what we're going to do after the game, whether that's getting on the plane, whether that's going out to dinner, whatever. But the fact that the Oilers get behind 2-0 early, and Calvin Pickard himself said it after the game, and I read it in The Athletic, his comments, he said, I want to use the exact word he did, I was dopey, and there's no excuse for that on the first 2 goals. On the Teravainen and Nick Foligno goals, your goalie saying, I should have that. And number one, it's always nice when your goalie takes some accountability, and most teams are going to, and when I say most teams, I mean the guys on the team, they're not going to want their goalie to do that. They don't want the goalie to have to be the difference between winning and losing. And it's implied in the way the Oilers have built this roster, in terms of what they spend money on, in terms of what they don't spend money on, where the priorities are. This is an offense first team. And on nights where their offense gets off to a slow start and their defense and their goaltending need to be difference makers, it's a tall ask. You have 3 defensive pairs. You feel good about 2 of them. Your third pair, it's a little volatile. It's not the most consistent thing in the world, but you have Emberson, you have Stetcher, and you are okay with those guys. You've gotten more than you ever probably could have expected. And I want to be fair. I'm not saying Brett Kulak isn't capable of being a second pair defenseman. It's just that a guy at his age is typically pretty boxed in as far as their role on a team. A team has very defined ideas of what players can be, but the fact they were willing to try him out on the second pair, the fact him and Nurse have worked together well in the minutes they have played together is a strong sign. And you have the possibility of putting together something really special. And this game is a good example of that in the microcosm, because who got you back in this game if you're the Oilers? Vasily Podkolzin and Adam Henrique, and then Corey Perry, and then Zach Hyman scores the game winner. You got goals from depth guys. And I wanted to hit this stat because I did think it was interesting. Last year, Vasily Podkolzin had all 0 goals. Vasily Podkolzin played 19 games for the Canucks last year. He had 0 goals. He had 1 on Saturday night. You got a goal from Adam Henrique, who is not having the best of season. You got a goal from Adam Henrique, somebody who we've talked about the possibility of where's he fit in the lineup, what's he going to do, and how are the Oilers going to find ways to keep him in the lineup? And he's had goals in 2 straight games. And then you throw Corey Perry in the mix, who hasn't had a ton of offense this year. We're going into Saturday night, Perry had 6 goals. Last year, between the Oilers and the Blackhawks, he had a grand total of 12. And you got back in the game from your depth. And one of the hallmarks of a good team is that you have multiple paths to victory. You know, we've talked a lot this season on Locked On Oilers about the pyramid, the hierarchy of Oilers needs of McDavid, Draisaitl, special teams, defense, goaltending, secondary scoring. Saturday night, you had it the other way around. You had secondary scoring, you had special teams, you had defense, and then you had McDavid and Draisaitl. You know, any night McDavid's not on the stat sheet and you manage to win the game and you're the Oilers, that's a good night. You are baking in to your team's idea, it's your team's identity, that McDavid's recording 125 to 140 points. And that sounds ludicrous to say in a vacuum, that you expect McDavid to just put up 120 points minimum in this environment. But you look at his last handful of full seasons, you know, in the 56 game season, he had 105 points. 3 years ago, he had 123 and 80. 2 years ago, he had 153 and 82. Last year, he had 132 and 76. He has 58 and 39. A night where you don't get anything, you don't get an assist. All you have to show that McDavid played on Saturday night is a little -2 next to his name because he was on the ice for 2 goals against early on in the game, the Foligno and Teravainen goals. That's all you have, and you still won the game. That's a good night if you're talking about the bigger picture. We're going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers, and when we come back, we're going to talk about why finding a way to win that game was such a strong endorsement of what this team's capable of, coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Tonight, the last game of Wild Card Weekend, the Minnesota Vikings are playing the Rams, a neutral site game in Arizona where the Vikings are 2.5-point favorites. And then next weekend, we do have 2 matchups settled. By the time you're watching this, the rest of the schedule will be settled. But The Baltimore Ravens are going to Buffalo and a matchup of the two MVP favorites, Lamar Jackson versus Josh Allen. The Ravens, 1.5-point road underdogs. And then Houston Texans and CJ Stroud coming off a nice win against the Chargers, going to Arrowhead to take on the defending two-time Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, where the Chiefs are 7.5-point favorites. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we're talking about the Oilers 4-3 win against the Blackhawks Saturday night. I, for one, had myself a nice weekend. Watching the game on Saturday night was fun. Sunday, I went to see the New York PWHL team play the Toronto team. Had a very nice time. You got to support hockey in your community, whether that's junior hockey, whether that's women's hockey. Hockey is hockey. And being in the community matters. And it was good to be out there. It was good to see a lot of people just excited. And that matters when you're at the grassroots level, like the PWHL is right now, where they're still in the early stages of figuring out the long-term trajectory of the league. I'm very excited to see where it goes. I'm glad the New York team is playing in the greater New York metropolitan area, so it is accessible to a community that does love hockey. And it's weird because New York doesn't have a ton of ice. It doesn't have a ton of opportunities for people to get into hockey. But man, when push comes to shove, there's something about it that's magnetic, and it's beautiful, frankly. As far as the Oilers, though, Saturday night was the first time in a while where they were in real danger of losing 2 straight games in regulation. They hadn't lost 2 straight games in regulation since the first week of November, when they lost the Devils and the Golden Knights back-to-back. Since those losses, the first week of November, the Oilers have gone 26-2. 26-2 since their last regulation back-to-back losses. And I don't want to make too much of the dragging yourself off the floor mentality, because if they had lost the game, they very much would have lost 2 games in a row where they had a bad first 10 minutes and it cooked them the rest of the night. Because, again, going back to the Thursday loss against the Penguins, if they just have a mediocre start as opposed to an atrocious start, there's a strong argument the Oilers could probably have won that game against the Penguins. If they're only down 2-0 as opposed to 4-1, that's doable. On the other hand, Saturday night against the worst team in the entire NHL, 2-0, that was doable. And like we said, Pickard knew he probably should have had 2 of them. The third goal he said he could live with, but finding ways to drag yourself off the mat, that matters. And I don't want to make too much of the whole not losing back-to-back games thing, because some of that is probably a bit of narrative production, meaning that based on that, we're trying to read into the quality of the team based on what's happened, as opposed to using the games themselves and how they play in them as a means of evaluating and determining, because it is hard to piece together. I said this in the first segment, but I want to reiterate it and expand on it a little bit more. In the course of a long season, you're going to have good games. You're going to have bad games. You're going to have games that entirely fade out of your memory just because there are so many games over the course of a long season. But when you consistently have found ways to differentiate yourself, to prove you're in that upper crust of the league, and yeah, winning streaks are nice, pulling off back-to-back wins, winning both halves of a back-to-back, putting your backup goalie in a position to succeed, where he's got a great record. He has one of the best backup goalie records in the entire NHL. I mean, I'm going to pull it up right now because I didn't write it down earlier when I was putting my notes together. But through 16 games and 14 starts, Pickard's 10-4-0. And if Pickard's going to play a third of the games, which he's about on pace to do, and I'm going to do the math here on my computer because I do want to make sure I say the right number. So 82 times 0.3, I should have done 0.33. So that's 27.606. So we'll say Pickard's on pace to start 27 games this year. Through 14, he's 10-4-0. he's well on pace to get to that 15 win mark. That's your expectation if you are a good team, what your backup goalie has. And again, wins are not a goalie stat. Wins are a team stat. It is an environment-based position. Wins are an environment-based stat. You would not mistake what Alexander Georgiev did on the Avalanche the last handful of seasons with what, say, Igor Shesterkin has done on the Rangers or what Sergei Bobrovsky has done on the Panthers, because we can look, at the stats, we can look at the quality of the team in front of them, and we can piece together a more coherent understanding. And that's really the goal anytime you're using statistics in an argument in sports. You want to match up what you're seeing on TV or at the game with what the numbers say. Because if they don't match up, like, for example, Georgiev in wins and losses, where his wins-loss record is great over the last handful of seasons in Colorado, and he's had a reasonable NHL career to this point. You know, for his career, he's 145, 95, and 22. He has a 906 save percentage, and 906 is slightly above league average for where we are in today's league. Right now, as the NHL sits here in 2024, 2025, the league average save percentage is 894. So Georgiev's career save percentage being 906, that's pretty good, all things considered. But if you go and look, last year, he's 38, 18, and 5. 38 was the most wins any goalie in the NHL had last year. The year before that, he had 40 wins, which was also the league lead. Last year, he also had an 897 save percentage and a 302 goals above against average. That's very different than what we're talking about in terms of what Calvin Pickard's doing, where, yeah, his numbers aren't great. He's got an 896 save percentage and a 2.5 goals against, but he's a backup goalie. Those are workable, solid numbers for what the Oilers are asking Pickard to do. And again, it is a reflection of a quality team that their backup goalie has a good record, he has passable stats, and they consistently find ways to win when they are out there. Because as we've talked about a ton on this show, there are maybe 25 goalies in the whole league that teams feel good about the role they're in, whether that's the starter or the backup. If we're combining those two roles, teams feel good maybe about 25 total goalies. There are not 32 good starting goalies, let alone 32 good backup goalies. There aren't 64 good goalies in the whole world. It is the most scarce position in the sport, and it's why if you have one of the great ones, it's really important you find a way to keep them, lest you be relegated to goalie purgatory, where you are constantly cycling through guys trying to find somebody who's passable. You know, it's not where you want to be if you're a franchise. And it's a strong endorsement of the team in front of them that the Oilers consistently find ways to win with two less than elite goalies. You know, at his best, I think Stuart Skinner is the 12th or 13th best goalie in the NHL, and that's enough in the NHL to win the Stanley Cup. You can point to Adin Hill, you can point to Jordan Binnington, you can point to Darcy Kemper. They are capable of getting Stuart Skinner to that level. That's all they need. We're going to take one more break on today's show, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about why picking up your teammates is so helpful in the course of a long season, coming up next. So be sure to stick around. Today's show is also brought to you by Rocket Money. Rocket Money can help you find subscriptions you forgot that you were even paying for. That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together all in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. So Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are recapping the Oilers' 4-3 victory over the Blackhawks Saturday night. And the Oilers are now getting to a point where it's not just about stacking wins. It's not just about putting together a nice run. The Oilers are now at a point where they realistically are in competition with 2 or 3 other teams to be the number 1 seed in the entire Western Conference. And home ice is not the be-all, end-all, as last year's playoffs are proof of. The Oilers are perfectly capable of winning important playoff games on the road, but it never hurts. And look, home ice has continued to deteriorate in terms of value. The upset margin has increased over time. The value of having home ice isn't as translatable to playoff success as it used to be. The game has evened out. There is more variance. The players are more skilled. But when you have as open a West as it is right now, and looking at the standings, the Oilers are a handful of points behind where the Golden Knights are. They're 4 points behind the Golden Knights. They're 6 points behind the Jets. They're 3 points behind the Wild, and they have the same amount of points as the Stars. All of that to say, the Oilers are perfectly capable of making up a 5 or a 6 point deficit in the span of a week or two. It's simply a matter of if the teams ahead of them are going to continue the pace they're currently at. And the Oilers have played tremendous hockey for the better part of 7 weeks now. We are going into almost the second full week. We are going into almost the third full week of January on Tuesday. And at that point, between November 23rd and Tuesday, the Oilers have played 750 points percentage hockey, and they keep playing 675 or better. They're absolutely going to have a chance to make progress on Vegas, on Minnesota, on the Jets, and get there. And part of that, and part of putting it all together, and we talked about the idea of not losing back-to-back games, that for whatever reason, when their backs are against the wall in that second game after they've lost, they have continued to find ways to claw, to scratch, to win that second half of a game. And yes, it's anecdotal and it's a narrative, but when you consistently find ways to do that, it shows resilience. And resilience is the most valuable trait in all of professional sports. You talk to any teams that have won anything, and they talk about how the most pressing memories, the most lasting memories are of adversity, are of losing, are guys getting injured, and finding ways to use that as motivation. One of the ones that always comes to mind for me as a soccer fan, as a Liverpool supporter, Liverpool lost in the Europa League final. And the Europa League is a tier below Champions League. Champions League is the big not international. It's the multi-country league tournament between various clubs across Europe. And the tier below that's the Europa League. And in the Europa League, Liverpool got to the final of that tournament. They got the lead, and they blew that lead. And one of the players on that team, James Milner, talked about it on a podcast that, as always, teams always have a party after their season ends. And most guys don't want to go to a party after their team loses a game like that where they had a lead and they had a chance to win. But at that party, Milner said all the guys were just kind of sitting at tables. They were feeling down. They were feeling disappointed. And Jurgen Klopp, their manager, kept egging them on. Come on, come dance. Come have a little fun. We're going to come back. And we're going to be back next season. We're going to have a better season next year. And a few years later, they did go on to win the Champions League. They went on to win the Premier League. And the DNA of that team was passed on to guys that were young and scrappy on that group that are still there now, 7-8 years later. And that adversity, it builds athletes. It really does define character, how you respond to adversity. And something about Saturday night that stuck out to me, and I said this in the first segment, I'll say it again. When the chips were down, who won you this game? Corey Perry, Adam Henrique, Vasily Podkolzin, and yeah, Zach Hyman scored the winner. One of your best players, but your spare parts, your glue guys. That's who got you in this game. Draisaitl's running mate, Vasily Podkolzin, who's having the year of his life, and maybe he was just entirely miscast in what Vancouver was asking him to do, and he's unlocked a component of his game that maybe was just there dormant this entire time. Maybe this is a one-year wonder. Maybe this is all just a perfect storm of environmental factors that's bringing Podkolzin's best game out. And this is as good as it's going to get. And next year, he's not going to be as effective. Draisaitl's defense is going to take a hit because they're not going to play together. But that's a next year problem. Right now, you have something special there in what you've managed to find from Podkolzin. And again, the idea of adversity coming into the season, Podkolzin was considered a fourth line wing who, if this season didn't go well for him, very well could have been absconding off to the KHL after this year. And he has clawed and played his way into consistent top 6 minutes alongside this team's second best player. Resilience, build, character. The more guys you have who have been through the wars, who have formed scars, who have formed calluses, the more of those guys you have in your group, the better equipped you are for when things go wrong in the playoffs. That cliche Mike Tyson quote that always gets circulated on Facebook by people in their 40s and 50s, the idea that everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, then what are you prepared to do? And the Oilers took a good punch Saturday night from a Blackhawks team that's desperate. And there's always the mindset in sports that the desperate team, that's the team that's going to find a way, because when the chips are down, and I'll quote Al Pacino in Any Given Sunday, it's the guy who's not afraid to die who's going to take that inch. And you would think a Blackhawks team that is mired in, I don't want to say a black hole of a rebuild, but it's very clear that what Kyle Davidson's vision for what this team was going to be, slowly inclining in the positive, increasing their points, getting closer to being a playoff team again. It's very clear that vision is not coming together in the second year of Connor Bedard as an NHLer. And that's something the Blackhawks are going to need to rectify. That's something the Blackhawks, as they go forward, are going to need to figure out. But you would think in a season where guys would be playing with literally nothing to lose because the Blackhawks are so desperate, would be able to find a way to claw, to scratch, to outwill. And instead, it was the Oilers guys. It was guys who have needed to find themselves at points. Podkolzin, who may or may not have been on his way out of the league if this year didn't go well. Corey Perry, who is year to year as an NHLer at this point. Adam Henrique, who has had real questions about his age this season and his counting stat production, found a way to score goals. And then to tie a bow on it, one of your best players in Zach Hyman on the power play, facilitated by Draisaitl. That is what matters. And you piece that together. This is just one piece in a big puzzle. But a game like that against a bad team, that is something that sticks with you. Because if you can do it then, you can do it. If you have proof, you can do it. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you happen to be listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. Reviews help the show immensely so other people can get in on the fun. I will talk to you guys tomorrow after. No, I will talk to you guys tomorrow after the game against the Kings. That game's got a 9:30 Eastern puck drop, so it'll be a late night for me, but I will have an episode for you as soon as that game is over. I will talk to you guys then. Until then, let's go Oilers.